Is Trey Turner all the way back? Who is the real CJ Abrams? We'll attempt to answer those questions and many more on our shortstop recap. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, November 20th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White. Today on the show, we'll take a look back at the top 10-ish shortstops from this past season and take a look at Scott's way too early 2024 rankings. And here we are, Scott. Welcome to Thanksgiving week, the best holiday of all. Yeah, do you have any big plans? Do you have any traditions? What's going on in the White household?
Sure, we have traditions and plans. I think most people do. I don't know that our traditions are that atypical Thanksgiving traditions. You know, we have the meal, the traditional Thanksgiving meal on Thanksgiving. And the next day we start decorating the place for Christmas. But I think that's pretty typical,
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
You got the extra long weekend to deck the halls. Enjoy that for a month.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, Christmas is my personal favorite holiday. Thanksgiving, it kind of feels like a warm up because I always feel like you get Thanksgiving with Christmas too. I mean, maybe not everybody celebrates Christmas the same way. Some people don't celebrate Christmas at all. Some people don't celebrate Thanksgiving at all. But if you do celebrate both, that's what it feels like. A little warm up.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I love both holidays, but just family, football all day long. Obviously, great food on Thanksgiving. Most people have Friday off, so you get to just kind of relax and kick back. You got the 4-day weekend going on. Yeah, I love Thanksgiving, and I'm looking forward to it later on this week. I also love shortstop, Scott. So let's break down the position.
Great transition,
I
Frank.
know there's nothing better than
You
that.
are masterful.
We'll start up top. The number one shortstop this past season. We also mentioned his name at the top of our third base recap. It's Bobby Witt Jr. He finished 6th overall in Roto this past season. The number 2 shortstop in head-to-head points leagues, does not turn 24 until June of next year. So already accomplishing a lot. That's what you get from one of the former top prospects in the game. This past season hit 276 with 30 homers, 97 runs, 96 RBI, 49 steals. He has 79 steals since the start of 2022. That is second in baseball behind only Ronald Acuna. No surprise there. The big story, improved the quality of contact across the board here. The expected numbers are amazing. Dropped the strikeout rate. Everything is there, Scott, for a legit 5-category producer here in Bobby Witt. And yeah, I think he's totally worthy of a top 5 pick this year.
Bobby Witt is amazing. I think we all have egg on our face because we were scoffing at people drafting him as early as 7th overall this year. And it's one of those things where, like, I think that my reasoning, the reasoning for my skepticism at the time was sound. And so if I had to go back and reason that out again, I would come to the same conclusion. But ultimately, the people who gambled on him taking a big step forward prevailed, because now, making out my rankings for next year, Bobby Witt is my number 2 overall player, at least in Roto leagues, behind Ronald Acuna. He's lower in points leagues, given that he doesn't walk much at all and that stolen bases aren't quite as valuable in that format. But number 2 overall in Roto leagues, number 1 at shortstop. While Ronald Acuna became the 3rd player in history to join the 30 homer, 50 steal club, well, exceeded it, right? He got to 40 and 70. Bobby Witt almost became the 4th player to do it in the same year. He finished a stolen base shy of joining the 30 homer, 50 steal club. So it was a pretty historic season that just got overshadowed by the more historic season for Ronald Acuna. And that's why I think it's perfectly defensible to take Bobby Witt 2nd overall. What's also amazing, I mean, for as good as he was one of the biggest underachievers, according to StatCast. Well underperformed his expected batting average, well underperformed his expected slug. And he closed the gap quite a bit in the second half, hit 301 in the second half. But I think there's good reason to believe, just looking at those StatCast numbers, that may be the truer form of Bobby Witt. He may be somebody who you can Hope will hit 290, 300 next year, as opposed to what did he actually finish with? He had 301 in the second half, 276 overall. Yeah, expected batting average was 297. Expected slug 535. Those were 96th and 95th percentile, respectively.
Oh, yes. Yeah, lots to love with Bobby Witt. I agree with you. He does drop down a little bit in a points league. Do you still have him in the first round in a head-to-head
Yes.
league? Okay.
Yes. I mean, you get to 50 steals. Again, he had 49, but in a head-to-head points league where there were 2 points apiece, that makes up for a lot of shortcomings, including the poor plate discipline that Bobby Witt has.
All right, let's move over to our number 2 shortstop this past season, Francisco Lindor. He finished 10th overall in Roto. He was the number 3 shortstop in head-to-head points leagues, and he hit 254 with 31 homers, 108 runs scored, 98 RBI, 31 steals, which was a career high, and really ran wild over the final 3 months. He had 7 or more steals in each of the final 3 months for Francisco Lindor. One of 4 players to go 30-30 this past season, 30 homers, 30 steals, along with Acuna, Witt, Julio Rodriguez. Of course, Francisco Lindor is the 4th. He's finished as a top 12 player in Roto back-to-back years, yet the ADP, the early ADP's got 24.9. Everything that I looked into with Francisco Lindor, I just fell in love. And we just did our first mock draft of the offseason. We'll talk about it on an upcoming podcast, but I took him in the middle of the second round. I paired him with Freddie Freeman. You know, I know Lindor is not going to give you the batting average, but the guy is going to give you every single thing else. Well, he doesn't kill you, right? He's going to hit like 250, 260. I just think he's a rock solid second round pick.
He is. You took him over some players that I think are better, including Matt Olson. Matt Olson really slipped in that first mock draft that we did. You'll find there was the full results for that well, I mean, by the time you're listening to this, they've been up for a while now. But yeah, Lindor had maybe the quietest 30-30 season in history because other guys were doing 40-70 and 30-50, and so 30-30 just kind of got overshadowed. I do think it's worth pointing out his combined steal total from the previous 3 seasons was 32. Now, I mean, obviously the stolen base environment changed the year he had the career high 31. So maybe that can be the new normal for Francisco Lindor, but it is kind of a leap to assume it's going to be the new normal for a guy who's been around that long and is now 30 years old, that he's just that you could just pencil him in for 30 steals year after year. It may be closer to 15. I would say 20 to 25 is my expectation for Francisco Lindor next year. And then there is the batting average issue, where we kind of talked about this in the what was it, the third base preview, where like batting average is one of those categories you have to address early, and it can be hard to catch up in it if you don't give it enough emphasis with your first couple picks. And so Lindor, you're taking a hit there. You're taking a hit in batting average if you decide to make him your second round pick. I still have him in the second round, but it's more like a late second rounder for me.
Yeah, no, I think those are all fair points. I took Lindor over Austin Riley, Bryce Harper, Matt Olson in that mock draft. And, you know, I was kind of on the fence with all those. The problem that I ran into is I took Freeman in the first, and I was like, do I really want to double up on first baseman this early in the
Oh, that
draft?
makes
So,
sense. Yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense. I didn't think about that. And I think I'd take Lindor over Riley as well. Harper, though,
in
well,
a
that's another
vacuum,
first baseman. Gosh.
yeah, in a vacuum, I think I would take Harper and Olson over Francisco Lindor. But
Mm,
yeah, it was just like the first base issue. So
yeah, that is a complication with taking Freeman, isn't it? I mean, I think Freeman, just on the merits, deserves. When did you take him?
7th overall.
7th overall. Yeah, I have him ranked 6th, I believe. You did take him over Corbin Carroll because Corbin Carroll slid to 8th in that one. So that would have solved your issue right there. I know you have concerns about Corbin Carroll's shoulder.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting to think about. We can get into that More later on shows other than the shortstop preview.
Yeah, that might be a
But
little lesson learned, a little early lesson learned.
yeah, I will say also for Lindor, even though he finished second to Witt in 2023, there are a couple of shortstops that I rank higher than him for 2024. So Lindor's only number 4 for me going into next year. But
All
again,
right.
I have him as a late second rounder.
One of those shortstops I believe you do have ranked ahead of Francisco Lindor is Trea Turner, who finished number 3 at shortstop this past season, 17th overall in Roto, the number 4 shortstop in head-to-head points leagues. He hit 266, which was a career low, 26 homers, 102 runs scored, 76 RBI, 30 steals for Trea Turner. And by now, we know what the issue was, or at least what we think the issue was. The first 4 months of the season, Trea Turner was pressing a lot, and we saw it in the plate discipline. He was chasing pitches. The strikeout rate was up. If you look at his first 107 games played, Trea Turner hit 235 with 10 homers, 21 steals, a 657 OPS. I keep referencing this one day. It was like a Friday night in August where all Philadelphia decided to rally around Trea Turner. They gave him a standing ovation. And from that day on, final 48 games, he hit 337, 16 homers, 9 steals, an OPS over 1,000, carried that into the postseason where he looked amazing once again. So one of the questions I led with, Scott, is Trea Turner all the way back? What do you think?
You know, as that was happening, as his August and September was playing out with those redemptive numbers for Trea Turner, I was skeptical because it had been so long, 2/3 of a season basically, where he looked diminished as a hitter, and the plate discipline numbers. I'm not even just talking about strikeout to walk ratio, but the plate discipline numbers were worse. It was pretty thorough, and at an age where you could see decline setting in, possibly for an athletic guy once he reaches age 30. That's a possibility. We've seen Hall of Fame caliber players, their career just take a nosedive at age 30. So I worried, not that Trea Turner was taking a nosedive necessarily, but that his hot streak might fool people into thinking everything is fine heading into next year. Well, if that's the case, I'm one of those who is fooled, because it lasted the full 2 months. He was back on track. It continued into the playoffs. He looked every bit like the guy, the first round caliber player we've always known Trea Turner to be. And the plate discipline itself improved. Specifically, the chase rate when he was struggling was much higher than we've seen in the past. And it normalized once he started to get back on track, which tells me, it kind of backs up the narrative. He was pressing to meet the pressure of the big deal he signed with Philadelphia, trying to make things happen that weren't there, kind of getting out of his usual approach. And then once he settled in, he was fine. He was Trea Turner again. So that is now my working theory. And so, you could probably justify taking Trea Turner as early as like 5th or 6th. I don't have him that early, but I do have him back in the first round for Roto Leagues, lower in points. He's a second rounder for me in points, but I do have him back in round 1 in Roto League. Chance to lock up some power and speed with a good batting average in all likelihood. That's the main thing that separates Trea Turner from somebody like Francisco Lindor.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with the theme, the idea that he was pressing first year in Philadelphia. You could even see it in his defense too. Trea Turner led all shortstops with 23 errors this past season, which was a career high. So I think it was just both of those things playing off each other, maybe taking the offense onto the field while he was playing defense. Same thing, the defense affecting his offense, whatever it might be. It was a rough first half, and then Trea Turner obviously turned it on over the final 2 months of the year. The number 4 shortstop was Corey Seager. He finished 19th overall in Roto, 4.1 fantasy points per game, was tied for 4th among all hitters, not just shortstops. Corey Seager was amazing. He finally put it together. 327, 33 homers, 88 runs, 96 RBI. He did all of that over just 119 games. His 150 game pace, 41 homers, 121 RBI for Corey Seager. Plate discipline remains amazing. The quality of contact was otherworldly, Scott. Now it's just, can Corey Seager stay healthy for, it doesn't even have to be a full season. Can we get 140 plus games? Can we get 150? Because it seems like we kind of have to bake in at least one IL stint per year for Corey Seager.
Yeah. That I think that is a fair concern, just looking at his history. Now, a lot of it was pretty significant things that required surgical intervention. There was a Tommy John surgery. There was a hip surgery. There was, I believe he missed a lot of time with a broken bone one year. I mean, that's the kind of stuff where it's just a series of unfortunate events as opposed to you having a I don't know how to put it, like a fragile muscular skeletal structure, you know?
He does have a history of hamstring injuries, whatever it's worth. He went on the IL with a hamstring this year. I noticed he went on the IL, I think, a few other times with a hamstring in his career as well. So just something that stood out.
Fair enough. But, I mean, in a world without Shohei Ohtani, who does, of course, things that no other player can do, Corey Seager would have been the AL MVP this year, even with the time lost to that hamstring injury. And in terms of, let me see if I can get it pulled up. My computer is not very cooperative today. It's moving very slowly. But if we're looking at head-to-head points per game, Corey Seager, I believe, trailed Acuna, of course, but not many others. Was he second?
He was tied for fourth. 4.1 fantasy points per game is what I had.
Okay, behind who else?
The three names ahead of him: Acuna, Shohei Ohtani, and Mookie Betts.
Yeah, that makes sense. That tracks. And then, of course, great batting average. The power production that's going to be tops at the position in all likelihood, unless Ellie De La Cruz or O'Neill Cruz take a big step forward. And then he's going to have the huge run in RBI production batting in the Rangers lineup. So there are no stolen bases here with Corey Seager, and that, in roto leagues at least, makes it harder to justify a first round pick in him. I do think he's more like an early second rounder. I've kind of flipped him and Trea Turner, at least in that scoring format, from where I originally had them. So now that Trea Turner's the late first rounder, Corey Seager's the early second rounder. But I'm very excited to draft him there. In fact, that's who I took 16th overall in that mock draft we just did, was Corey Seager.
Yeah, and I love who you paired him with too. Kyle Tucker in the first round, who you're expecting at least 25 steals. You might get 30 out of him. I think there's a chance, man, if there's any way, Corbin Carroll almost fell to you at 9. If you could start your team with Corbin Carroll and Corey Seager, my gosh, that is A+.
Sick. That is sick. You know, if I'd gotten Corbin Carroll, though, maybe I would have been the one to take Matt Olson.
Oof. Yeah, that's a fun team. I think in a lot of drafts, like Jose Ramirez will be a late first. That could be a pairing that makes sense. Jose Ramirez, you get your 20, 25 steals. Corey Seager, not going to give you any speed, but obviously, man, elite 4 category contributor. And I think even better in a point.
I mean, leaving Luis Arraez out of it, because, you know, obviously he's kind of a one-trick pony. But I would say the safest bets for batting average in the entire draft, apart from Luis Arraez, or Freddie Freeman, of course, and then probably Corey Seager. It's probably those two. And as we were just talking about with Francisco Lindor, banking batting average early should be a priority for you in a roto league. And so I think that's even more justification to take Corey Seager. By the way, he is my number 1 shortstop in points leagues. And I believe he's a top 5 overall player for me in points leagues is Seager, where obviously steals are less of a priority in that format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Projection systems are starting to slowly roll out. If you go to fangraphs.com, you could see early steamer projections. Not every player is projected yet, but there are only 6 players projected with a better batting average than Corey Seager so far. Ronald Acuna, Luis Arraez, Freddie Freeman, Yordan Alvarez, Michael Brantley, and Yandy Diaz.
Michael Brantley. I'm going to say no to that. Just no. That's not going to happen. Steamer.
But yeah, I mean, to your point, he's looking like a top 5 or 6 contributor in batting average. Again, that is Corey Seager.
Yeah, and I would, I would put him higher than some of those others on the list too.
The number 5.
I think he might be dragged down. His batting average projection might be dragged down by that uncharacteristic 2022 where he hit 249 or something like that.
Was it that low? You might be right.
I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was completely out of character for Corey Seager. He suffered more from the infield shift that year than any other player, and obviously the infield shift has been eliminated or at least greatly reduced now.
245 was the batting average in 2022, 306 in 2021, 327 this year, 292 for his career, projected for a 292 batting average by Steamer so far. The number 5 shortstop eligible player was Nico Horner. We spoke about him on the second base recap. He does have shortstop eligibility, just got there, got the 20 games in. But if you want to go back and listen, you can do that on our second base recap. Let's take our first break because I've got a lot of thoughts on CJ Abrams. So I want to make sure we have enough time to get through all of it. We'll do that right after this.
It's never too soon for college hoops. It's the Arizona Tip-Off on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. Let's continue recapping the shortstop position. Number 6 this past season was CJ Abrams. He finished 33rd overall in Roto. He was the number 7 shortstop in head-to-head points leagues. He just turned 23 years old in October, and he hit 245. He had 18 home runs, 83 runs scored, 47 stolen bases. That was the 5th most in all of baseball. We know that CJ Abrams does not walk very much at all, a 5% walk rate, but does make a good amount of contact. Strikeout rate just 19%. Excuse me. But he is a tough one to figure out, Scott. His season basically changed. Once CJ Abrams was moved to the leadoff spot, that happened early in July. Up until that point, he was batting .233 with 7 homers and 11 steals. After moving to leadoff, CJ Abrams played 73 games. He hit .256 with 11 home runs, 36 steals over the final 73 games played. Just crazy stuff. Was running wild. It's really backloaded by a monster July, and then he wasn't so great from August 1st on. I have my mind is like spinning. My head is spinning, Scott, trying to figure out CJ Abrams. He's terrible against lefties. His on-base percentage is not good, but he was a former top prospect, and he just stole 47 bases. So who's to say that he just doesn't continue to get better?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I hear you on that, and I keep the more I draft, the more I see other people's drafts, the more I think, gosh, I have CJ Abrams too low. Because I mean, the thing is, I do think this transformation we saw from him as a base stealer, where he, from you gave the numbers, but basically he was on a 70 steal pace basically for the last 3 months of the season, and I do think that is closer to what we should expect from CJ Abrams going forward. I mean, that was what he was billed as coming up through the minors. That was supposed to be his carrying tool. That and the hit tool was considered really good, and we haven't seen that play up to maximum effect yet. But he was supposed to be a huge base stealer, and it just wasn't there for the first year and a half of his big league career. And then suddenly the light went on, and he began to make full use of it. And I think that's legit. I think part of the disconnect here is how valuable are stolen bases. I think we're still trying to figure that out because they are so much. They're more plentiful now, and in the past we'd see a guy with 60 to 70 steal potential, and that could carry you in the category, and that's not the case anymore. you're going to accidentally wind up with enough other steals that it could potentially be overkill if you invest a 4th round pick in a guy who's primarily providing you speed. And it just ends up being more than you needed. And you could have used that very premium pick on something a little scarcer. I'm not saying there are a lot of 60 steal guys out there, but I'm saying I'm saying unless you're going to be committed to avoiding steals for the rest of your draft, you may end up paying an upcharge for something that's not actually going to be that useful for you. If you get what I mean. Because okay, he's not a total zero for power, CJ Abrams. He hit the 18 home runs, but the batting average is an issue. He's not a great on-base guy, even batting high in the Nationals lineup. It's unlikely he scores 100 runs because he walks so infrequently, and he got on base at a 300 clip exactly this past year. And he could continue to develop as a hitter. Like I said, the hit tool was supposed to be a major part of CJ Abrams' profile, and we haven't seen it fully come through yet. But I don't know. There's a lot of really good shortstops we haven't talked about yet. And I feel like CJ Abrams is pretty limited compared to them. He has one amazing skill. But again, like if you don't optimize that skill correctly in the team you're building, it's going to be kind of a waste.
I do think specifically in a Roto categories league, CJ Abrams has to be drafted with the right team. And so far, I've seen him go in the 4th round of the 2 drafts that I've done. I was one of the people to take him in the 4th round. And I think on a team where you take like a Yordan Alvarez or a Corey Seager, a Matt Olson, or dare I say 2 of those guys, right? If you start your team with Judge and Seager or Judge and Soto or, any of the 2 I just mentioned, and then you want to grab Abrams in the 4th round, I think something like that makes sense. You also realize you are depending on CJ Abrams to get you a huge chunk of your steals. And if he gets hurt, all those go away, right? Like you're putting your eggs in one really big basket here with CJ Abrams. So
right.
He is he is a fascinating player to figure out.
And to further the point you were making about who should be taking him in round 4, the guy who took him in round 4 in this mock we just did, it's our buddy the Welsh, actually. He took Trea Turner in round 1.
He did.
So, I mean, that seems like overkill for stolen bases to me, not to mention overkill at shortstop, because you got a base-stealing shortstop, with 2 of your first 4 picks. That's a lot of other categories you're neglecting. And I don't know. I didn't feel like that was the most optimal choice he could have made in round 4, even if there's certainly justification for taking CJ Abrams in round 4 in that scoring format.
Yeah, he's going to be a fun one to talk about this all season. Again, it's CJ Abrams we're talking about. I know you mentioned the hit tool was one of his carrying tools through the minors, and Fangraphs had his upside as a 70 grade hit tool. They currently have him at a 50 out of 70. That's where he's currently at in his progression. So again, there is a chance he gets better. Maybe he hits 260, 270, 20 homers, 50, 60 steals. I mean, that is a really, really awesome player. But, you do have to pay a premium as of now if you do want to get CJ Abrams on your team. Let's continue on with some other players. The number 7 shortstop was Ha-Seong Kim. We spoke about him on the second base podcast. He has second, third base, shortstop eligibility. Gunnar Henderson was number 8. We just talked about him last week on our third base podcast. He has third base and shortstop eligibility. The number 9 shortstop was Xander Bogaerts. He finished 61st overall in Roto, the number 9 shortstop in head-to-head points leagues, and wound up hitting .285 with 19 homers, 83 runs, almost unfathomable. 58 RBIs. He had less RBI, Xander Bogaerts, than CJ Abrams, who we were just talking about. I mean, that is almost impossible for what he just did.
Conceivable.
Yeah. He did have 19 steals, which was a career high. All of that was obviously helped out by this monster September where he hit .417, 4 homers, 6 steals, and 1122 OPS. He also had a great April, if you remember. Xander Bogaerts got off to this awesome start. The 4 months in between, he hit .244 with a 666 OPS. He was not a useful player for fantasy at all. With all that being said, Was playing through a wrist injury, had a cortisone injection around the All-Star break. So I think that's kind of the excuse that's built in there, Scott. I think Xander Bogaerts is fun. I don't know. I'm not really excited to draft him. I don't even know what the ADP is going to be, but I don't think I'm going to be very excited to draft him.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that ridiculous September went a long way to salvaging Xander Bogaerts' season, made his final numbers look a lot better than I think anyone who had him, their perception of his season was. I mean, he practically had a 2020 season. It was 1919, right? That would have been his first ever 2020 season. A guy who, of course, has been a fantasy mainstay. So that's pretty impressive, all things considered. He did suffer from that run in RBI misfortune that really was a problem for most of the Padres lineup. And we expect the Padres lineup's going to get worse. I mean, if they trade Juan Soto away. So I don't really know what to make of that. Like it seems inconceivable that it could happen again to Bogaerts, but realistically, what's the Padres lineup going to look like? That you have to factor that in. Yeah, he's kind of become just a safe, boring player at a position where there are a lot of exciting players. And so I see him as kind of a fallback guy. Like he's not really going to hurt you in anything, particularly if you see the correction in runs and RBI. The batting average should be respectable. Home runs respectable. Steals respectable. None of them amazing necessarily, but he's just he's going to keep you afloat if you do decide to go cheap at shortstop, because he will not be drafted as the number 9 shortstop, even though that's where he finished.
Yeah, the early ADP has him as the 13th shortstop off the board. 115.7 is the ADP. So it's, it's not a bad cost for Bogaerts. And if the Padres lineup could bounce back, maybe there is some appeal there based on the cost. But I think I want to see what happens with his offseason and how he's feeling entering spring training. There was a report that the Padres could ask him to move off of shortstop too, which seemed kind of weird to me. His outs above average was still in the 80th percentile or something like that. But I saw multiple outlets reporting the same story. So we shall see.
Where would they move him to? Got Machado at third, I guess second?
It was either second or first base. Apparently their best defensive alignment is Ha-Seong Kim at shortstop, Jake Cronenworth at second, Manny Machado at third.
Yeah.
The only place that leaves is first base, but I kind of thought part of the appeal of signing Bogaerts was that he was a really good defensive shortstop. So
that was,
seems weird.
That was the craziest contract handed out this offseason. It was like a 13-year contract, right? And then if you're going to move him to first base in year 2, a right-handed hitting, questionable power first baseman signed to that kind of contract, like that does seem that does seem like you're hamstringing yourself there. Though I get it. I mean, just from you're out of the GM's office now and in the dugout setting a lineup. Ha-Seong Kim's an amazing shortstop. It's kind of a waste to have him at second base. So I get it, but like, I don't know. That seems like a poor use of resources if you're then sending Bogaerts over to first base.
It wasn't a 13-year deal. Let's not kill AJ Preller just yet.
It was only 12, right?
11 years.
11. Oh, okay.
11.
Man.
It's still a really long time. The number 10 shortstop this past season was Bichette. He finished 80th overall, averaged 2.9 fantasy points per game. He turns 26 years old in March. Wound up hitting 306, 20 homers, 73 RBI, only 5 steals. Was kind of derailed by injury, played 135 games. The second half there, he went on the IL twice, once with a patellar tendonitis in his right knee, and then once with a strained right quad. So sounds like those two things were related in some way. And he doesn't really steal anymore. The stolen bases have gone from 25 to 13 to 5 over the past 3 years.
Sprint speed's gone down with it.
Yeah, I'm not expecting much in the way there. Maybe 8 to 10 steals, but the other 4 categories should still be pretty valuable. Scott, what are your thoughts on Bichette?
So this to me is the most confounding shortstop to rank. I think Bo Bichette is a really good hitter. I mean, just this past year, his expected batting average 98th percentile, 308. He actually hit 306. But he is up there among safe sources of batting average. So it really comes down to what he's going to provide for you every other way. I mean, the power has gone. You mentioned the decline in stolen bases, which is more precipitous, but the power, just the home run output the last 3 years, 29, 24, 20. He missed some time with injury this year. So, maybe we don't hold that against Bichette so much, but still, if you're a 25 homer guy as opposed to a 30 homer guy who is also not providing double-digit steals at a time when double-digit steals are everywhere, I don't know. And then his plate discipline has never been very good. So if we're talking about Bo Bichette in points leagues, it gets even worse. His point per game average this year was 2.90, which was worse than Elly De La Cruz, CJ Abrams. It was pretty much the same as Xander Bogaerts. It was kind of middling for a shallow league. From a shallow league context, it was kind of middling there, point per game average for Bo Bichette. And so is that how we should approach him? A guy who we were drafting, where were we drafting him in? We weren't drafting him in round 1 still this past year, right? But round 2.
Yeah, I think it's second rounder.
And the previous year we were like the 6th overall pick, guy who's still in his mid-20s, 25 years old. I mean, he's got his whole career ahead of him, and have we soured on him this much? I don't know. Like I feel like just from an evaluation standpoint, I've been kind of negative on Bo Bichette for a while now compared to the average person, and yet I have a hard time justifying CJ Abrams over him, just given Bichette's history and where he is in his career trajectory. It's a tough one. That's we'll get into Bichette more in a second, I guess, but that's kind of my overall take of the shortstop position. My overall outlook here is, okay, there's still a lot of talent here. I could understand calling it a deep position, but everybody seems a lot more questionable. All the talent there is more questionable than it seemed like in past years. I mean, between Trey Turner's season, Bo Bichette's season, Xander Bogaerts' season, CJ Abrams and Ha-Sung Kim, a lot of stolen base potential there, but their actual hitting profiles aren't that impressive yet. O'Neal Cruz, Elly De La Cruz, Matt McLain. Like there's a lot of potential pitfalls there, and I feel like if you step in the wrong, if you take a wrong step at shortstop, you could step on a landmine and kind of be out of luck at the position, particularly in deeper leagues.
Yeah, Bo Bichette is an interesting one for sure. I don't know that I would depend on the power bouncing back too far either. He just hits so many line drives, so many ground balls that, it kind of limits his power upside too. And much like Vlad, Bichette did not play very well at home in these new dimensions in Rogers Center. So I don't know if they're going to do anything with that, but
it was a combined 100. Hang on a second. 142 combined 142 runs in RBI for him. Yeah, he missed some time with injury. He still played 135 games. So that's doing as much to hold Bo Bichette back as anything. And, we think of the Blue Jays as having a good lineup, but a lot of players have had trouble hitting at Rogers Center the past couple years. And I don't know that it's going to improve.
I feel like both Bichette and Vlad are kind of tied together, right? Like they're only going to reach their upside if they both kind of click together at the same time. And, we've kind of seen inconsistencies from both of those guys over the past couple of years. So we'll see.
The differences, and I think there are two key differences. The raw data for Vladimir Guerrero is much more impressive than Bichette. Yes, he had the high XBA, Bichette did, but the exit velocities are kind of meh, 60th to 70th percentile, while Vladimir Guerrero's top of the scales as far as that goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other is that at his best, Bo Bichette relied on a big stolen base total and Vladimir Guerrero didn't. And I'm just not counting on that bouncing back. His sprint speed this year was 42nd percentile. So I don't know. I feel like I'm a downer on Bichette, but I feel like I'm hesitant. I also feel like I'm hesitant to drop him in the rankings as much as everybody else is. Maybe I just need to get over it and say Bichette is not who we thought he was.
Get over it, Scotty. Bye, Bo Bichette.
Is that your take with him? Like, are you just like, is he, are you treating him more like Xander Bogaerts? Like he's a fallback option who's pretty good for batting average, but you can't count on him being a huge contributor in anything else.
No, I think he's better than Bo Bichette. Better than Xander Bogaerts. But will I invest a third-round pick in him? Probably not. So
no,
my early take
I wouldn't either.
I probably won't have a lot of Bo Bichette. His early ADP is 34.8. So, he's a late
All right,
third
maybe
round.
I'm not. Okay, maybe other people aren't downgrading him as much as I know. He went late in this mock draft we just did, later than I had him ranked.
He went 29th overall. So,
I don't know anything then. Never mind. All right, I just wasted a lot of time saying things about Bo Bichette that, or the perceptions surrounding Bo Bichette that aren't even true. Everybody still loves Bo Bichette except me and you.
Yeah, that might be right. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll get into Scott's early top 20 at shortstop entering 2024. We'll do that right after this.
It's never too soon for college basketball. Don't miss the Greenlight Sunshine Slam on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. No news and notes because we are recording this a few days in advance for Thanksgiving week. So instead, we'll just jump right into the top 20. Way too early, 2024 shortstop rankings. And we'll just start up top here. The top 5 includes Bobby Witt, followed by Trea Turner, Corey Seager, Francisco Lindor, and Gunnar Henderson. I think that mostly sounds right to me.
So did we mention Gunnar Henderson? Did we mention where he ranked this past year?
Yeah, I mentioned him. He was ranked as the number 8 shortstop. And obviously we went more in depth on the third base podcast.
Yeah, we did. But that's kind of incredible. I mean, he placed lower than Ha-Sung Kim for as good as Gunnar Henderson's season was, for as high as everybody seems to be drafting him. I think everybody's drafting him ahead of Bo Bichette, right? As a pretty clear third rounder. And, I think there's the expectation of some growth there, as we talked about in the third base preview. But that kind of speaks to how much talent there still is at this position, shortstop, and how hard it can be to rank because the players contribute in different ways. You got the huge base stealers, and then you got the more well-rounded types, and then you got the bigger power bats like Henderson. I guess Henderson would be. We have some hope he increases the stolen bases, but right now it's mostly power.
Yep. 6 through 10 in the early rankings, we have Bo Bichette, followed by Elly De La Cruz, Matt McLain, Nico Horner, and O'Neal Cruz. We did talk about Elly De La Cruz on the third base recap rather. We spoke about Matt McLain and Nico Horner on the second base recaps. But O'Neal Cruz is a name we haven't talked about yet, Scotty, and obviously nothing to take away from this season. He only played 9 games due to a fractured ankle that he suffered back in April. Early reports are that he'll be 100% ready for spring training. O'Neal Cruz has played 98 games at the major league level. He's only batting .237, but he's got 19 homers, 13 steals, over 150 games. That is a 29 homer, 19 steal pace. And I think based on what we've seen in terms of speed, we would expect him to steal more than 19 bases, but he still kind of remains a mystery just because we haven't seen enough from O'Neal Cruz.
Yeah. So it's easy to downgrade him, but the long-term outlook, I don't think has changed. I mean, he still has first-round caliber upside, does O'Neal Cruz. Will he maximize his speed output coming back from such a significant leg injury? It's hard to say. He could, but I could see him favoring it too. I think that would be reasonable of him to do. So that just adds to the confusion. I think the most encouraging thing we saw, though, for as little as he played, he cut way down on the strikeouts. He did the thing, like, that's what's disappointing about it, is Oneil Cruz was doing exactly the thing he needed to do to take this huge step forward. It was only 9 games, but he struck out just 8 times in those 9 games.
And he had 7 walks.
Yeah, no, it was looking great. And I think, let me double check the math here. If I can open up the calculator quickly enough. But I think it started in spring training too. Like, there were signs of it even then. I know it's weird to.
I looked at the spring training numbers because I felt like I remembered the same thing that you're talking about. But then when I looked, it was like 2 walks to 14 strikeouts.
Well, not so much the walks, but the strikeouts.
I think it was like 14 and 54 at bats, which sounds like
so it was a 25% rate.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's we're looking for him to avoid the 30 to 35% rate. 25% for Oneil Cruz would be amazing and would allow him to tap into that massive power potential. So yeah, there were very good signs in a very small sample, and now he's coming off an injury that cost him most of the season. Hard to know exactly where to rank him, which fits in with the theme at shortstop. So I'll go ahead and reveal that I have CJ Abrams right behind him at 11th. And so let's have the CJ Abrams conversation again. So I have CJ Abrams behind Oneil Cruz, behind Nico Horner, kind of going backwards through the rankings now. So Oneil Cruz 10th, Nico Horner 9th, Matt McLain 8th, and then Elly De La Cruz 7th, Bo Bichette 6th. I got to move CJ Abrams up a few spots, don't I?
I mean, if you want to be closer to AP, yeah, but
I got to move him ahead of Nico Horner, right? That's the one that stands out. How can you have Nico Horner 9th and Abrams 11th? Horner's the safer bet for batting average, but Abrams might have 20 more steals than him, and probably will double him up in homers at least. I think Horner has the dual eligibility, second base in addition to shortstop, but yeah, I think I got to make that change. I mean, part of it's like I don't like Abrams behind. I like Abrams ahead of Horner more than I like Abrams ahead of Cruz, who I rank behind Horner. Because I think Cruz's upside is much higher.
So there you go. Go Cruz at 9, Abrams at 10, and Horner at 11.
But then it gets tricky with what to do about second base, because McLain and Horner are both eligible at second base. Just trust me on this. It gets tricky. I think I'm going to leave Cruz where he is.
All right.
So that people can take advantage of what I think is going to be a discount given the uncertainty. So I'll leave him at 10th. Actually, he'll drop to 11th because I'm going to move CJ Abrams up ahead of him to probably 8th. So I have Bo Bichette 6th, Elly De La Cruz 7th, CJ Abrams 8th, Matt McLain 9th, Nico Horner 10th, Oneil Cruz 11th.
Okay.
How does that sound?
In
Roto specifically.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think having Abrams closer to Elly De La Cruz, obviously they do it in, like, they're different size human beings. They look completely different, but like the path that they take might not be, what they wind up with might not be that dissimilar, right? Lower batting average.
I mean, Elly De La Cruz,
he should have a lot more power. There's
right. He in his prime, I see him hitting 30 to 40 homers a year.
Right.
And I don't see that for Abrams.
Abrams could hit, 20 and 60.
Yeah.
I could see Elly going like 25, 50, right?
Right. It might not happen. The power breakthrough might not happen for De La Cruz yet.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's fine though. I think getting Abrams inside the top 10, just again, realizing his upside, and I guess what he did over the final 3 months, right?
But I'm still irked by Bo Bichette being ahead of both.
Yeah, that's kind of like a respect ranking,
Mm-hmm. And I don't even like Bo Bichette that much.
Yeah, I haven't ranked players yet, so I can't really offer you too much wisdom on that one. But we spoke about this on one of our recent podcasts. It comes down to how you want to build your teams, right? Like, Bo Bichette,
Kind of.
he's not going
I
to
mean-
give you speed, but I mean, it could be he could hit 320, based on line drives, and he makes contact. The counting stats could be very good. Maybe it's only 25 home runs, but like
he could get back up to 30 homers. It's not that big of a stretch. If he hits 320 with 30 homers, he's not far off from being Corey Seager.
exactly. So I mean, there are easily ways that you could talk yourself into Bo Bichette
Yeah.
being well worth a 3rd round pick.
I'm not going to take him in round 3.
Me
Again.
neither, as of now. But you
I'm
can
not going
talk
to take him in round 3, but do I take him ahead of CJ Abrams? That's really what it comes down to in a roto league. I'm hoping, like realistically, I'm probably not going to take either given where they're going.
Right.
So maybe a moot point, but people follow my rankings and I'm telling them that they should take Bichette ahead of Abrams based on that. So I don't know. But this is kind of what I'm noticing for a lot of the player pool, certainly around the infield. And we talked about the globbiness at starting pitcher, where there is just there are so many, not exactly redundancies, but there's a lack of clarity. The infield positions feel overloaded right now, and the starting pitcher positions just feel like flattened, tierless to a certain degree. And so I think our first in-house mock draft revealed this, that it's just, there might be more personal opinion at play than in years past. Like, it might be harder to predict how any draft is going to play out. Maybe it's just because we're drafting in November, and so nobody's opinions are, there hasn't been time to build consensus yet. But given how much I've struggled to rank these players, I think there's more to it than that.
All right, 11 through 15 in the shortstop rankings. Abrams is still here at 11, but it sounds like that's going to be Nico Horner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
So again, Abrams will be inside the top 10. It'll be Horner at 11, followed by Ha-Seong Kim, Xander Bogaerts, Jackson Holiday.
O'Neal Cruz at 11. Sorry. Horner 10, Cruz 11. Ha-Seong Kim 12, Xander Bogaerts 13, Jackson Holiday 14. We see a clear tier delineation here.
Yeah, and Dansby Swanson is down at 15 as well. Jackson Holiday, the crown jewel, the apple of everybody's eye. The Orioles just keep popping out prospects left and right. Top prospects, I might add. Jackson Holiday, arguably the number 1 prospect entering 2024. Number 1 overall pick in 2022. He is the son of former major leaguer Matt Holliday, so he comes with that pedigree. He grew up around the game. Obviously, his dad was a great hitter as well. This past season, Jackson Holiday hit 323, 12 homers, 24 steals, a 941 OPS, nearly as many walks as strikeouts, and he did that across 4 different levels, reaching AAA as a 19-year-old. So I don't know if he's going to be up on opening day, Scott. I feel comfortable saying we will see Jackson Holiday at some point in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure when that will be.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously not going to be, I don't think he's going to be a huge difference maker right away. I think eventually he will be a 5-category contributor, but there's lots to like, obviously.
Yeah, if I was sure he was going to be a 5-category contributor right away, and really 6 categories. I know, we talk about 5 categories because that's normally what we're scoring in fantasy, but like the best trait Holiday has of all is the plate discipline. The fact he walked 101 times in his first full professional season is just unbelievable, especially when you factor in all the other tools he has. But he is very young. He moved very fast. We've seen in recent years, even the highest end prospects have a harder time breaking in, transitioning to the majors than maybe we saw in like the heyday of Ronald Acuna and Juan Soto. So, I want to be a little cautious in my ranking. And as you point out, it's no guarantee he makes the opening day roster. My feeling right now is that he will, because it's pretty obvious he's going to be up at some point next year, given that he already surged to AAA. It's probably going to be sooner than later. It's hard to imagine they're going to let him spend half a year at AAA, slow him down that much. And if he's going to be up sooner than later, given the fact, given how high end of a prospect he is, he would very much be in the rookie of the year race, you would think. And if he's going to be in the rookie of the year race, he's going to be out most of the year anyway. The incentives are just to bring him up at the start of the year, keep him up all year so that you have a chance to score draft picks based on where he finishes in awards voting. He has to be up from start to finish in order to qualify for that. And so that's why I think my leaning is Jackson Holliday will be on the opening day roster for the Orioles. It's going to depend on him looking ready in spring training, obviously. If he goes 0 for 20 with 10 strikeouts, it's probably not happening. But if he does what we think Jackson Holliday can do in spring training, then I would presume it does happen.
And remember last spring training, we had Anthony Volpe and Jordan Walker just flying up draft boards. Mm-hmm. Jackson Holliday is one of those names where if he is just tearing the cover off the ball in spring and we get any type of confirmation, he'll probably be going inside the top 100 picks. So his early ADP is 192. I think that's fine for now. But again, that's a number that could skyrocket come spring training. Did want to quickly mention with Dansby Swanson, who you have ranked at 15th, that the more I dug into it, I kind of liked it. I don't think he has massive upside. Obviously, the stolen bases got cut from 18 to 9 from
big
2022 to 2023.
That's a big deal. They could come back, but that's
what I'm thinking. I think they will because he was still 77th percentile in sprint speed. Did go on the IL with a bruised heel, so perhaps that kind of slowed him down a little bit. Craig Counsell is now the manager of the Chicago Cubs, and he was very aggressive with people stealing bases with his time in Milwaukee. I think we can get Swanson back to 15, maybe 20-plus steals, again, with maybe him taking advantage of the rules. So,
well, the other thing you have to watch out for with Swanson, other than the stolen bases, so the year he had 18, 2022, he hit 277, pretty good. This past year when he dropped to 9 stolen bases, 244. And you go the year by year batting average for Swanson, 244, going back in time now, 244, 277, 248, 274, 251, 238, 232. So like he's probably closer to a 250 hitter than a 270 hitter.
Yep.
And if you're not much of a base stealer, kind of just a 20 to 25 homer guy who's hitting 250, that feels more like middle infielder material than starting shortstop material in fantasy, which is why I have him behind Jackson Holliday. Jackson Holliday is kind of the dividing line between the guys I feel good about as a starting shortstop in fantasy and the guys I don't feel so good about as a starting shortstop in fantasy. Dansby Swanson is now on the wrong side of that divide.
All right, let's wrap up 16 through 20. We have Tommy Edman, who we spoke about on the second base recap, followed by Carlos Correa, Willy Adames, JP Crawford, and good old Trevor Story, who returned in August of last season after undergoing UCL surgery in the previous offseason. So, he only played 43 games. I don't know how much stock we could put into it. I think very clearly, Scott, this this group is pretty blah. Don't feel nearly as good about this group as, and that would make sense. Obviously, we're moving further down the rankings, but maybe a quick thought on either each player or a few players that stand out here.
Yeah, I mean, like we said about Tommy Edman at 16 when we did the second base preview, his main asset, the stolen bases, just aren't as valuable. They aren't as unique to him as they were in the past, so he loses value for that reason. His flaws show up a little more when he's not such a standout in stolen bases, though he is still very versatile and can be a pretty handy player in Roto. Carlos Correa, I think if I'm forced to fill my starting shortstop spot from this range, I think Carlos Correa is the one I want because I do still think there is a chance he delivers a high-end outcome. Obviously, it hasn't happened in 2 years with the Twins, and the second year was even worse than the first. But he was playing through injury most of the year, and still hit the ball very hard. His max exit velocity was 91st percentile. Average exit velocity 70th percentile. The walk rate was still high. The strikeout rate was not bad. It was pretty much middle of the road. 20 22% it was for Carlos Correa. So like the underlying numbers are still pretty strong. And with if he shows up with a clean bill of health in spring training, not even 30 yet, I think that it's realistic to think Carlos Correa could bounce back and become kind of a must-start player in fantasy again. I mean, remember, it's just last offseason, there was a huge bidding war for him where he was originally getting contract offers in the $300 million range. So there's still a lot of talent here for Carlos Correa, as disappointing as this past year was. Willy Adames, I think very similar to Dansby Swanson, kind of a meh batting average, pretty good power production. You have to treat any speed that he's going to provide as a bonus. JP Crawford is a tough one to rank. I will say because he walks so much, JP Crawford is much better in points leagues, much easier to rank there. I actually have him 15th in points leagues. He averaged more head-to-head points per game, JP Crawford did, than Ha-Seong Kim and Bo Bichette, 2.99 versus 2.90 for each of them. So I think he's a sneaky pick in that format if you just want to grab a shortstop with your last pick in the draft. You know, obviously head-to-head points leagues tend to be shallower overall, so I think that's a viable option there with JP Crawford. But for roto leagues, doesn't really stand out at anything. He did hit for a decent amount of power this past year, but it was the first time it ever happened. 19 home runs. His previous high was only 9. And it mostly happened in the second half. JP Crawford had this awakening where he hit 282 with 11 homers in the second half. Actually reached base at a 401 clip after the All-Star break. So he was doing some things he's never done before. Is it legit? He's going to be 29 in January, so it's still young enough that you could see JP Crawford taking that kind of leap, but it's going to, like, whether or not you actually draft him ahead of Trevor Story is going to depend, I think, on how deep your league is, what kind of team you're building, because it's limited upside there for Crawford versus very high upside but very low downside for Trevor Story, who was just awful coming back from the elbow injury in the middle of this year. Really didn't do anything right other than steal bases. Stole 10 in 43 games, which was encouraging to see. It's nice to know that's still going to be part of Trevor Story's skill set. But the power wasn't there. The strikeouts were ridiculous. Chalk it up to rust, maybe, but maybe not. You know, he was showing signs of decline even prior to 2023. So it's hard to know what to make of Trevor Story at this point. He's young enough that I could see him bouncing back, but I don't know that that's the high probability outcome, which is why I rank him only 20th. And in fact, I think I've dropped him behind Anthony Volpe since these rankings were published. So I think I have Volpe 20th now and Story 21st. Volpe, of course, coming off a 2020 season as a rookie, very impressive as far as that goes, but he hit only 209.
Ugh.
And there are some questions about the batted ball profile. It puts the ball in the air a lot, which compromises the batting average. It might be what allows him to hit 20 plus homers, but is that trade-off worth it? Remains to be seen. Still very young. Again, coming off a rookie season, was only 22 years old. Sometimes we see players going from year 1 to year 2 who make the sort of statistical leaps that you couldn't even detect in the data before they happen. So I think if you're just rolling the dice on upside, I've come to believe Anthony Volpe is a better choice for that than Trevor Story is.
I do like Trevor Story where he's going right now. The early ADP is 181.4, more so as a middle infielder. Obviously don't put much stock into this past season, but the prior year, 2022, he was on a 25 homer, 20 steal pace over 150 games. He still ran this year. The batting average is going to be a liability, but I think we can get a 2020 season out of Trevor Story. Maybe the same thing from Volpe, but yeah, both are going to have pretty low batting averages here in 2024. All right, there it is. Shortstop for Scott. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And We'll be back again on Wednesday. Bye-bye.